colleague at the Delhi School of Economics, Ramin Jure, once told me a story which had circulated in the 1970s, in the days when he was a Naxalite or an armed revolutionary, drawing inspiration from communist struggles around the world. A policeman taunted a youth he had arrested. "You Naxalites talk so much about Vietnam," he said. "Show me where it is on the map." The youth, who was illiterate, put his hand on his chest and replied, "It is in my heart." From decolonization to partition, from Jawaharlal Nehru to Indira Gandhi, the nation of India had spent nearly the last century developing, establishing itself as a power, and claiming legitimacy as its own nation. However, attempts at unity have not been easy for the growing nation. As it struggled with its neighbors throughout this century, the focus of this video, though, is not necessarily on the struggles that the nation had on the world stage, nor it is about the struggle of the nation's leadership. The struggle of our particular focus requires a dive into India's forests. Deep in these forests, a war is waged between two sides: the government and a group of radical terrorists, or, depending on another perspective, revolutionaries and a corrupt system. Our focus is on the Naxal movement that took place within much of eastern and parts of central India, a movement that, like in the first analogy I gave from The Burning Forest by Nandini Sundar, suggests a strong following that will lead to this movement enduring for quite some time. The first part of our video focuses on explaining the origins of Naxalism, its ideologies, and its early history, focusing on the question, who were the Naxals and where did they come from? So what is Naxalism? Where did it come from? Naxalite or Naxalism is an informal name given to communist groups that were born out of the Sino-Soviet split in the communist movement in India that took place in the 1960s. With the split, China and the Soviet Union broke a long-standing alliance, causing a divide in the communist ideology. As for how this impacted India, there was a divide between the Communist Party of India, or CPI. The side that would remain the CPI followed the Soviet Union's existing approach of a peaceful coexistence with other ideologies, whilst the newly formed Communist Party of India, Marxist, believed the more radical revolutionary approach that heavily favored class struggle and resistance. This new branch of communism within India would be where Naxalism emerged from. However, not all members of the CPI Marxists would become Naxalites, as a specific group of members of this party used the approach of another radical leader in the Western Hemisphere. And, by the way, if this all seems a little complicated, that is because it absolutely was. A newly independent India in 1947 had people that had a lot of expectations for its future, from a lot of different groups within the nation. And thus many parties broke out, including different versions of communism. It all seemed a bit like a giant boxing match between a dozen or so different sides. Now back to the Naxalites. Ideologically, they based their movement on the Maoist movement that had been successful in China, underneath its namesake, Mao Zedong. Maoism focused heavily on direct revolts made by the lower classes of society in order to take what they wanted and achieve their goals. The founder of the Naxalist movement was a member of the CPI Marxists initially, but found the new party to be too revisionist in itself, as it was willing to partake in existing politics and postponed any attempts at armed struggle, which he advocated for, and thus in 1967 he broke away from the party to help lead a peasant revolt in West Bengal. This leader's name? Charu Majumdar. Charu Majumdar is significant for his work, the historic 8 documents. These documents serve as an outline for the principles and ideologies of the Naxalite movement, with Majumdar writing between 1965 and 1967. As the name suggests, The document consists of 8 monographs that are fundamental for providing the reasoning behind the further splintering of the Communist Party of India. The first of these documents focuses on why it was that Majumdar felt insurgency was a necessity in India, or what they were fighting for. India, following its independence in the 1940s, had experienced what Majumdar described as a food crisis and an economic crisis. The Indian government and the Indian bourgeoisie was not able to determine a solution to the internal crisis, basically describing it as an issue that was more critical to the lower classes of Indian society. Majumdar felt that there was no priority given to this issue by a government built for the bourgeoisie of India, and thus the lower classes, the lower castes, were suffering. The government is not doing what it needs to do to address the economic issues of the country. The solution? Revolution. The second document criticizes the existing Marxist Communist Party of India, claiming that it does not do enough. It is revisionist in that it operates within the existing system of Indian government. The first among revisionist thought is to regard Krishak Sabha, the peasants' organization, and trade unions as the only party activity. Party comrades often confuse the work of peasants' organization and trade union with the political work of the party. They do not realize that the political tasks of the party cannot be carried out through the peasants' organization and trade union. The party does not take things far enough, and Majumdar warns that revolution would only come with some breaking of the law, operating outside of the government system. The third document focuses on the Naxalbari movement in comparison to other revolutionary movements, such as that underneath Mao Zedong in China. In this document, Majumdar analyzes and justifies the violence undertaken by these movements as a necessity to change. Yes, comrades, today we have to speak out courageously in a bold voice before the people that is the area-wide seizure of power that is our path. We have to make the bourgeoisie tremble by striking hardest at its weakest spots. The fourth document provides a strategy on how revisionism can be combated through an area-wide seizure of power. By taking rural areas, specific areas, Maoists or Naxalites could gather support from the lower class people that inhabit these areas, strengthening their cause. The fifth document reflected on the year 1965's events, what had happened, and what the government failed to accomplish. Within this document, Majumdar reflects on the idea of creating a new party and advancing the armed struggle. The sixth document reiterates a few points, primarily the importance of fighting against revisionist elements in the existing communist parties of India through revolutionary struggle. And by 1966, the political climate in parts of India such as Bihar and West Bengal were worsening, as virtually nothing had been done to fix the issues that Majumdar mentioned in his previous monographs. The peasants began taking what they needed, and the government was prepared for violent repression. The seventh document urges the movement to capitalize on this tension. The eighth and final document, written in April of 1967, emphasizes the importance of continuing the fight started through peasant revolts, as these fights would spark support for revolution and grow the demand for change. Majumdar claims that while the peasants may be ignored by most, they are fundamental to revolutionary practice. 1 month later, the 1967 Naxalbari uprising would begin, fighting against the landlords that had wronged the people that worked the land, that refused to give them this land. The revolt broke out between sharecroppers and landless laborers in the mountainous region of Naxalbari in West Bengal. It arose because landlords refused to cede land that had previously been taken from the sharecroppers by the government, which also ties into the food and economic issues mentioned by Majumdar in the 8 historical documents, and sent police and armed bands against the cultivators when they tried to occupy the lands. Many of the cultivators were Santai tribes people who countered the landlords' attacks with bows and arrows. The revolt was led, or at least supported, by left-wing communists, or Maoists. The revolt was made up of tribes people as well as Maoists. These peoples used the aforementioned bows, as well as spears, and any weapons they were able to get their hands on. They were fighting police who were there to support the landlords, as well as any of the landlords' goons that might have been there. One police officer and 11 peasant protesters would be killed in this revolt, and it is from the village revolt in Naxalbari that the appropriately named Naxalist movement took root. Following the uprising and increased Naxal activity in the 1960s and early 70s, the Indian government grew concerned over the rise in Naxal violence in West Bengal. As a response, the government began Operation Steeplechase, which was a military operation intent on targeting Maoist strongholds and leaders in West Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa, which were the worst affected territories. The operation had superficial results as this, along with the arresting and death of Charu Majumdar, would divide the Marxist-Leninist Communist Party of India. The party created with Majumdar's beliefs in mind. This divide would not entirely wipe out the Maoists, but the Naxalite movement would be suppressed temporarily for the time being. The issue as to why it would come back? The government never fixed the issues that led to its rise in the first place. The people were still upset. Things were not fixed. So the second part of this video will now explore Naxal activity following this downwards trend of the rest of the 20th century, as Naxalbari activity sees a resurgence in the 21st century. This part of the video will take a look at Naxalism in the 21st century, as well as the impact that Naxalism would have on the Adivasi people. Let's start with an analogy. Right now, in central India, the Maoist guerrilla army is made up almost entirely of desperately poor tribespeople living in conditions of such chronic hunger that it verges on famine of the kind we only associate with sub-Saharan Africa. They are people who, even after 60 years of India's so-called independence, have not had access to education, healthcare, or legal redress. They are the people who have been mercilessly exploited for decades, consistently cheated by small businessmen and moneylenders, the woman raped as a matter of right by police and forest department personnel. Their journey back to a semblance of dignity is due in large part to the Maoist cadre, who have lived and worked and fought by their side for decades. Naxalism saw a resurgence in the 21st century. On September 21st, 2004, two major left-wing extremist groups, the Communist Party of India, Marxist-Leninist People's War Group, and the Maoist Communist Center of India, or the MCCI, were merged, and the Communist Party of India's Maoist, or CPI Maoist, was born. Until then, though the two groups had some links, their area of operation were located in two different geographical zones. The MCCI, led by Prashant Bose, operated in Bihar, Jharkhand, Bihar West Bengal border area, and parts of Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh, while the PWG, led by Mupala Lakshmana Rao, alias Ganapathy, operated in the southern states of then undivided Andhra Pradesh, the Dandakaranya area, and parts of Maharashtra. The merger gave the outfits the control of many areas right from Bihar, Nepal, border to Andhra Pradesh. Even as the MCCI and PWG fought turf wars over differences, The merger gave them pan-India presence and exposure that they always desired. They believed in achieving compact revolutionary zones, or CRZ zones, or liberated zones. They were successful in creating a red corridor and liberated zones from Bihar touching Chhattisgarh to the AOB region. It was because of the merger between two communist groups that in the past had sometimes conflicting interests that Naxalism saw this resurgence in the 2000s. Both parties had previously controlled land within parts of India, but with this merger, the unified party's influence became much more significant in this red corridor. The location was perfect in accordance to Majumdar's descriptions in his writings, as these areas were some of the most harshly affected by socioeconomic issues, meaning the Naxalite presence would have the most impact in these areas. Let's take a look at the people that occupied these regions next, though. Another analogy. It was hard not to feel angered by the casual racism of outsiders, bus conductors kicking elderly Adivasi men, and shoving women off a seat to make room for some minor official. A constant litany of complaints about how Adivasis did nothing but drink and did not want education or modern medicine. Adivasi is a collective term for the indigenous people of the Indian subcontinent, the natives of this land. For the sake of this analysis, much of the focus on Adivasi within this video focuses on those found within the Red Corridor. In the experience of Sundar above, the analogy, casual racism and discrimination of these people were common. They were looked down upon, seen as inferior. Not only was this a social issue, but the Adivasis also experienced the worst of India's economic crisis. So why exactly are the Adivasi people exploited? Why are they discriminated against? Soni Sodi, an Adivasi school teacher turned politician, serves as a voice for the Adivasi people regarding the injustices that they have faced. She had previously been arrested by the Chhattisgarh police for serving as a conduit to Maoists, whatever that might mean. During her imprisonment, she experienced firsthand the abuses of the police force, and now serves as one of the loudest voices when it comes to Adivasi perspective. The Indian government would prefer she remain silenced, as her story unveils potential human rights violations within the police system. The questions that I always get asked first by Adivasis is, why are we getting beaten up by the police? Why do they barge into our homes and take our supplies, eat our chicken, rice, and lentils, and beat us up like animals? We never asked the government for electricity, water, supply, road, or schools. We are happy with our jal, jangal, jamin, our water, our forests, and our land. We treat the police and the Naxalites alike. If they ask for water, we won't refuse. So how are we wrong? The police ask us why we go to the Naxal committee meetings. There's a problem even when we don't go. When women go to fill water from the tankers, placing their containers waiting in line, the forces patrolling the area fling away the vessels, saying, "This water belongs to our government and not yours. You cannot have it." Why such treatment? In the Bayadia region, the National Mineral Development Corporation operates a mine. The forests and even the mines belong to us, but our situation is no better than beggars in our own land. People don't get any jobs and don't have access to basic health care. Now they regret giving their land to the corporation? When they resist, there are killings to clear the people off the land. In the name of fighting Naxalites, the state is eliminating Adivasis. This explanation is pulled from an interview with Soni Sodi conducted in 2019. Within it, she provides information of the treatment that the Adivasi received, being treated like animals, beatings, refusal of assistance. And then there is also the situation of land. The Adivasi happen to live in a very mineral-rich area. The government wants this land for the purpose of mining, government's money for them. As such, the Naxalite issue is a very appropriate excuse for the government to fight within this region very conveniently. All of this seems to create a loop of the Naxalites occupying these areas due to government corruption, and then the corrupt government using their existence as a means to continue their malpractice, with the biggest victim being the Adivasi people. Decades of upper caste racism have so naturalized the association between Adivasis and animals that they are often described as subhuman. As in the Bastard tourism website, which ran for a few years from 2005, before middle-class Adivasis had it taken down. Describing drinking habits, the government proclaimed, when drinking water from a stream, they do not take up water in their hands, but put their mouth down to it like cattle. This instance just serves as further evidence of how dehumanized the Adivasi were. They were meant to be seen as animals, to make acquisition of their land easier. So as a response to the Adivasi people's treatments on behalf of the Indian government, as well as the upper class populations, it had become sensible for Naxalites to occupy these territories for a variety of reasons. For one, Naxalites see this occupation as protecting the marginalized peoples that they live there, which they kind of are by acting as an obstacle for the government that would otherwise come in and wipe them out. Secondly, Naxalites feel like they have the most potential in garnering support for their cause within these areas to expand their cause, which they also managed considering the number of Adivasis willing to work with them against the government that they are starting to grow to hate. And thirdly, the Naxalites strongly dislike the government and the infrastructure that comes along with it, and thus feel they are actively throwing a wrench into the system by keeping these territories out of the grasp of the government. The growing Maoist insurgency over large swathes of the mineral-rich countryside could soon hurt some industrial investment plans. Just when India needs to ramp up its industrial machine to lock in growth, and when foreign companies are joining the party, Naxalites are clashing with mining and steel companies essential to India's long-term success. So was everything great for the Adivasi with the Naxalites around? Not necessarily. The Naxals came in and established new structures for the Adivasi to follow. Introductions of sangams, committees within villages which are intended to dictate who enters and leaves, with close supervision exercised over every single household, which is a security measure. Punishment is especially brutal, with disputes receiving little warning before resorting to exile or death. Villagers describe Maoist beatings as brutal, saying that sometimes spouses and even children of the accused person are forced to participate in the beating. And of course, the cons of avoiding infrastructure means that the country is not able to provide any sort of education to these areas. So why keep the Maoists around? In an ideal world, the government would not be repressive and thieving, and there would be no need for Maoists. But given the choices villagers have, their best option is for the government and the Maoists to coexist peacefully, or at least to train their guns on each other, leaving the villagers alone. For most of them, having no Maoists at all is not a good option, since there is thus no countervailing power to confront exploitation. So how bad could the alternative possibly be? The Indian government did not do a great job handling the increase in Naxal activity in the 2000s. Within the Bastard district of Chhattisgarh, the Salwa Judam was a response to the insurgency of Naxalism. With the government of Chhattisgarh looking for additional support in ending this insurgency, they began to allow for state-sponsored vigilantism in 2005, which saw the recruitment of tribespeople discontent with the presence of Naxalites. Ultimately, this counterinsurgency will be handled very poorly. The third part of our video focuses on the response of the Indian government, specifically that in Chhattisgarh to Naxalite insurgency, with the introduction of a counterinsurgency known as the Salwa Judam. So, in theory, the Salwa Judam, or purification hunt, was supposed to be a powerful support for the Chhattisgarh police force in putting an end to the Naxalist insurgency. The Salwa Judum consists of all those who come to a meeting and say they will fight the Naxalites. This quote from a Judum leader suggests the mission is plain and simple: fight against the Naxalites. It was also clear that the Salwa Judum would have the backing of the government based on documentation from the Ministry of Home Affairs in 2005, which said the important decisions taken so far include modernization and upgradation of state police forces, fortification of police stations for anti-Naxalite operations, mounting and focused, coordinated, and sustained intelligence-based affected areas, and, significant to the Salwa Judum, the creation of local resistance groups. So the government has support from the locals. What could possibly be the issue with giving these locals power? The Judum was oftentimes made up of young tribals who held high resentment for Naxals that they were after, and oftentimes were much more brutal in comparison to how they even tried to portray the Naxals that they were after. They did not discriminate, and oftentimes Judum SPOs or special police officers abused their position to take advantage of the Adivasi villages that they were supposedly trying to protect by ridding them of a menace. The Salwa Judum had been responsible for enormous violence within the district, including deaths, arson, and rape. Rather than stopping Maoist violence, it had actually led to an increase in retaliatory killings by Naxalites. Across the district, rumors abound of people being burnt inside their houses and bodies being dumped on the roadside. There's a general feeling of insecurity and abandonment since there is no one to complain to. Estimates of those killed in the last year vary from anywhere near 500 to over 1,000. Our attempts to get an accurate and comprehensive picture of the number of deaths in the district ran into 3 roadblocks. For one, the discrepancy in official figures and the lack of an updated list. 2, the fact that a large number of deaths appeared to be officially unrecognized. And 3, there is no detail in the circumstances of these deaths, so even while some named figures on the government list and other figures on the Maoist list, it is not clear who killed them. That report comes directly from the excerpts of independent citizens' initiatives around the time of the Salwa Judum. During the period in which the Salwa Judum were active, the Indian government, along with associated news outlets, have reported on several instances of Naxalite violence and activity being at an all-time high. These news reports, of course, conveniently blame the violence almost exclusively on the Naxalites, leaving the responsible local resistant groups out of their stories. As the government of India may not be interested in removing violence from the regions of Chhattisgarh that the Adivasi occupy, but just the Naxals that prevent their infrastructure, their ability to profit off of these regions. Graphic testimonies from Sawapali villagers, located in the Naxal-impacted, quote-unquote, location of Andhra Pradesh, gave graphic testimonies taking a pause because my script reloaded. Sorry about that, and I'm sorry this is in the video because I don't know editing super well. Gave graphic testimonies to Judum activity. The Salwa Judum also throws the small children in the fire besides beating and killing pregnant women. If the Salwa Judum catches people, it kills them, tears apart their body, slits their tongue and heart. We are very frightened these days. The actions of the Salwa Judum rose concerns over human rights violations, along with other shady, questionable acts such as the recruitment of underage soldiers, eventually leading to the banning of the Judum in 2011, where it was declared unconstitutional. In addition to being seen as a highly controversial establishment, the Salva Judum and similar vigilante efforts were failing containing the Red Corridor. The government began to feel an increased amount of pressure as the Naxalites were still being presented as a significant internal security threat. A 2009 quote from then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh described Naxalism as the greatest internal security threat to our country. It appeared following the failure of vigilante efforts that it was succeeding. The government needed to step up, and as a result, increased military presence would be introduced to the region surrounding the Red Corridor. Operation Green Hunt is credited as a government initiative underneath Singh to end the insurgency once and for all. The operation involved the deployment of tens of thousands of national paramilitary forces, such as the Central Reserve Police Force, or the CRPF, and its Commando Battalion for Resolute Action, or COBRA, units, alongside state police forces across several states, including Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Bihar, Odisha, and West Bengal. The objective of Green Hunt was to flush the Naxalites out of their strongholds into the forest surrounding the areas that they occupied to regain control. This excessive use of force was justified, according to Arundhati Roy in her book Walking with the Comrades. Though misinformation campaigns ran on news networks describing the injustices of the Maoists, almost all newspapers and TV channels ran stories blaming the Maoists for the horrific train derailment in Jharkhand in West Bengal in May 2010, in which 150 people died. 2 of the main suspects have been shot down by police in encounters. This type of propaganda has only sought to justify Operation Green Hunt, despite it also conveniently targeting groups of Adivasi. You could argue that the government is still more interested in gaining access to the mineral-rich lands of the Adivasi than it is actually wiping out the Naxals. Narendra Modi replaces Singh as Prime Minister in 2014 and only supports Operation Green Hunt, doubling down on the efforts of eliminating Naxalism from the Red Corridor. Since then, the news has been filled with similar encounters, as Roy described. 15 Naxalites surrender in Chhattisgarh. 3 Naxalites, including a sniper specialist, killed in Bastar. Key Maoist leader killed in Bastar. These headlines, all too common, seem to be in the news constantly nowadays. It is no secret that modern advancements have made a significant impact on the Naxalite movement as it stands. The government claims that Naxal insurgency has decreased by nearly a scale of 85% since 2010, with LWE attacks, or left-wing extremist attacks, being the denomination of this. Whether or not this report in itself is propaganda to show a decrease in Naxal activity, to further justify the controversial operations is debatable. However, it is a fact that Naxal influence over the Red Corridor has decreased. For now. All of this brings a few questions to mind. How permanent will this removal be? After all, has much been done to solve the underlying issues? What does the removal of the Naxals mean for the Adivasi? Though they have not been a complete boon for the Adivasi, the Naxalites have been able to prevent the land of the Adivasi from being taken from them, where they remained active. The press release claims Naxalism will be eliminated by March 31st, 2026. That's their deadline. Whether or not they will succeed completely is questionable. Thank you.